I'm okay, recorded, yes. Most of you know me as president of the Swedish SPR. And I've invited, of course, our own members in Sweden, but also the members belonging to SPR in London. And there may be other people also in US or even Japan, as I understand it. So all nations are welcome. Helen, I pronounce your name right? Helané?
Helané Wahbeh.
Helané Wahbeh. Okay, okay, very good. We will have this evening about the Noetic Signature, which Helané will talk about. Approximately 30 minutes, and then there's open for questions, discussion. This is our last lecture this spring in Sweden. Then we have already decided September 16 for a discussion with the psychic in Sweden that some of you know from a television program, Jörgen Gustafsson. That's September 16, and we have not yet decided if it will be physical or and digital. But September 16 is done, is decided. And then we plan for a digital lecture or conversation with Charlie Toth, who most of you know as one of the pioneers of transpersonal psychology and altered states of consciousness. September 30, you will get more information about that. It will be a discussion with him. He is quite old now, but he is preparing for a discussion with me. We will have the same link, Zoom link to this meeting with Charlie Toth. That I can say, I've told you about our future lectures. There are some more decided, but the ones in September, you know now. Now we have Helané as our lecturer. I'm very glad for that. You are research director at Noetic, at IONS, Noetic Sciences. And you have a background. I think with those words, I can ask you to continue. I'm very glad you were with us.
Wonderful, wonderful. It's great to be here with you today. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you for inviting me, and I'm glad to be here. I am the Director of Research at the Institute of Noetic Sciences. A little bit about me, I actually have a clinical background, so I'm trained as a naturopathic physician and had a private practice treating patients for quite a bit, and then got into clinical research doing meditation research at Oregon Health and Science University. What you wouldn't know from that biography is that I also went to my first seance when I was 10 years old at my grandparents' house, and that my whole mother's side of the family have trans-channeled automatic writers, channeled artistic pieces, and that I grew up with a very strong spiritualist type background. Growing up in the US, it was okay in my family, but I kind of kept that hidden in the closet and didn't really talk about it. And I certainly couldn't bring it up in my academic environments. So through a synchronistic flow of events, I ended up at IONS for a expert meditation researcher work group. So it was through my meditation research. And I was like, what is this place? How can they be asking all these incredible questions that I thought were so taboo? And so I was able to eventually join the team. And now I can marry those two sides of my background, my research background, my personal interest in channeling and all things psychic. So that's a little bit about what brings me here today to be sharing with you. So what I'm going to do now is share my screen so you can see my slides, but I need permission to do that from the host.
I hope Rasmus is on and can assist
Yeah,
you.
you should have it now.
Okay, great. I do. Thank you. So you should be able to see my slides now. And so what I'm going to talk to you about today, IONS has a number of different research programs, but one that I'm going to talk to you about today is the Noetic Signature and the Noetic Signature Inventory. And I think you'll find it interesting in that we can have a great discussion about it. So at IONS, we have this guiding premise, which is kind of our overarching research question, which is that everything is interconnected and that embodying that awareness reveals information and energy not limited by space and time, which can profoundly amplify transformation, innovation, and well-being. So the Noetic Signature really focuses in on this middle factor, which is this revealing information and energy not limited by space and time, which you could also call psi or psychic, or there's so many extended human capacities. There's so many different names ascribed to that experience. And it's probably no surprise to you that knowing that these experiences exist on a spectrum, and that on one side we might have intuition or gut hunches that everyone has experienced at some point in their life. And at the other side, we might have things like mediumship, trance channeling, macro, PK, things that are perhaps more rare. And then we have everything in between. And so at IONS, we really support this notion that everyone, all humans, and probably animals too at some level, have the capacity to access this information from beyond space and time, but that the way that they do that is unique to them. And so we've coined this term called the Noetic Signature that describes this unique characteristic of each individual about how they do this. So you might be asking, well, why are you creating a whole new term? We already have so many terms. Parapsychology has been studying this for over 150 years. There's many terms already. And so, our interest in doing this is partly to package it in a way that's very accessible for people and to support these concepts of extended human capacities to come out of the closet and for people to more easily be able to talk about them, express them, and use them in their daily lives. So, there's so many issues with taboos with some of the currently used words. And so perhaps this term Noetic Signature might make it easier for people to accept it. You see, I have this picture of Michael Thornborn's book. I don't know, maybe some of you have seen it, but it's about 250 pages of terms, just terms used in parapsychology. And there's multiple words that are used for the same experiences. And there's also same words used with different definitions. So, when I first started at IONS, my family always called what we did channeling. And people said, no, that's mediumship. And other people might say, oh, no, that's just psychic abilities. And we'd go round and round talking about the words and the definitions. So anyway, that's a little background of why we're creating this, new term for something that's already been studied and known about and has a whole big list of terms already. And the focus of the Noetic Signature really is on the subjective experience, people's subjective experience of these phenomena. So the program to bring this into the world, it has multiple phases from a research perspective. And the goal for us was to develop an inventory, kind of like the Myers-Briggs, which is a personality inventory, or other personality inventories. It's like the Noetic Myers-Briggs. And we are developing this inventory in a number of phases. So, and I'll be talking to you about these in more depth in the next 30 minutes. So the first phase was an open-ended survey where people actually wrote out their experiences of accessing information and energy not limited by time and space. The second phase was doing a qualitative analysis on that data and creating the first draft of an inventory. And then the third phase, which we're in now, is having developed the final version and validating the inventory. So phase one was this qualitative survey. We had about 500, just over 500 people type in their responses to how they access and receive information and energy from beyond time and space. And we did a qualitative analysis of all that text data and ended up with a few major results categories. One was ways of engagement. Another was ways of knowing, then ways of affecting, ways of expressing. And there were also a lot of descriptions of what people call the field, and then types of information. So in terms of engagement, I found it interesting that people described what they did to get into this state to be able to access or receive information and energy. And so some of those ways were intentional. They set an intention, they pray, they meditate, being in nature, tradition, rituals, and just consciously connecting to some force greater than themselves. Some of those ways were also unintentional or spontaneous through dreams or just happening in their daily lives. So there were a bunch of different categories about how people actually access this information. The second category, ways of knowing, there were subcategories beneath this. One was intuitive, like it just comes to them in a gut hunch or intuitive sense, embodied, feeling it in their bodies, what we kind of jokingly called super senses, so inner seeing, hearing, touch, smelling, and tasting, knowing through emotions, and then direct, so from deceased, purported deceased relatives or other non-physical beings, the environment, energy, symbols, etc. The next large category was ways of affecting. And so the most common in here was healing, influencing others, and then influencing systems, objects, and environments. There was a really fascinating story that one of the participants told where he had some experience with psychokinesis and for some reason decided he wanted to see if he could influence his electric meter. And so he directed his intention to the meter, and the meter actually stopped twirling and charging him for electricity usage. And he said he had his children turn the air conditioner on and off, and the meter did not turn at all. And so the meter stopped working for a few months, and he wasn't getting charged for his electricity. And then he started feeling really bad about that and said, okay, I'm going to get it to work again. He set his intention to turn his electric meter on again, and it started twirling again and everything was fine. Anyway, I thought that was a really interesting psychokinesis example. So we took all that qualitative data and we created an initial inventory, which had 350 questions. There were 5 questions for each theme. And we reviewed that very large inventory by our staff and narrowed that down to 175 questions. That was still too long for us. We wanted it to be quite a bit shorter. So we administered this 175 version to over 500 people. And then we did an exploratory factor analysis. So we took those 175 questions and found that they loaded on 11 factors. And we took the questions that loaded the highest on each of those factors to create a final inventory. So I'm going to run through those 11 factors here with you. So I'll just give you a brief overview of all of them first, and then I'll describe each one in a little bit more detail. So the first factor was inner knowing, knowing through emotions, feeling in the body, and knowing mentally. Second was embodied sensations, physical sensations from other people, inner knowing through touch, inner voice and apparent communication with non-physical beings, knowing the future, knowing other people's minds, knowing through dreams, affecting your personal world, visualization and manifestation, and healing. So let's go into these a little bit more deeply. So the factor one, it was number one because it explained the most variability of our data set. And that's why it was the first factor that showed up. And so you might call this factor just generally inner knowing, but there were some sub pieces to that. So the first was knowing through emotions, and that's what some might call clear empathy. So, and this is beyond normal empathy. This is actually feeling actual emotions of people around you. You know, there were many stories of people walking into a room, they were feeling great and wonderful, and then all of a sudden they have all this anger. They don't know why they have this anger, and then they see someone across the room who's really upset. The next one was feeling in the body. And so, you know, often these statements were, I just feel it. I just feel that it's true. And it's like a knowingness in the body without any specific physical sensation. It's just a knowingness or a gut feeling in the body. And some people might call this clairsentience. Then there's knowing mentally. So a lot of these people would say, I just know it, like it just comes into my mind. And a term that's been used for this is called claircognizance. So these three pieces, the knowing through emotions, feeling in the body, and knowing mentally, were factor one and described much of the variability in our data set. Not all of it, but the other factors explain the other variability. So I'm not going in numerical order. I'm kind of going in categorical order of these factors. So the next factor was embodied sensations. And so this is a little different than just feeling in your body. These were specific sensations like heat or cold or goosebumps or smelling things, dizziness, tingling. So, you know, this is a strong one for me personally. If I hear something that I feel is truth, I'll get goosebumps all over my body. And I say, oh, okay, there's some noetic information coming in for me here. And I've had that for most of my life. And maybe some of you have experienced that too. Factor 8 is also about the body, but it's about actually feeling other people's physical sensations. So they might pick up on people's pain or their temperature or, you know, other negative or I guess positive physical sensations. There was one participant who talked about, you know, feeling totally fine and driving in the car with a friend, and all of a sudden her left knee was becoming quite painful and she didn't know why. And so she asked her friend, are you okay? What's going on in your body? And she said, oh, you know, my knee is really hurting me from this surgery that I had a few weeks ago. And so this has also been called telesomatic, or actually feeling another person's physical symptoms. The next factor is inner knowing through touch. You might know this as psychometry. So that's people who actually hold something in their hand and can obtain information about it. Then we have inner voice, apparent communication with non-physical beings. So what's interesting is what we might think of as clairaudience or hearing voices loaded very strongly with mediumship and channeling. it's an interesting concept to think about, that those two are related in some way, and perhaps in our discussion we can talk about this. But those items loaded strongly on this factor 4. Knowing the future, of course, is precognition, and so that showed up as factor 9. And then telepathy, or knowing other people's minds, showed up as factor 11. And we can also talk about those quite a bit as well in terms of their relationship and their kind of why it was lower down. Perhaps those are more rare in people than some of these general intuitive type capacities. Factor 10 was knowing through dreams. And of course, we know through dream ESP experiments that have been done for decades now that we can obtain information that we wouldn't normally know through our dreams. So we, had conversations about this piece and if it really was a sort of separate skill, if you will, or characteristics, but we let the data guide this process, and that there were specific people where that was just more prevalent, that it showed up for them in their dreams. And then another factor was affecting your personal world. So again, this is one where we wondered if this should really be included as part of the inventory, because it's not necessarily a skill per se, but it's a lot about how people use it and integrate it into their lives. And because we really want to support the learning nature of this process and the subjective nature, we did end up keeping it. And so this is about how people incorporate or integrate that information that they receive, whether they use it for decision making or self-healing, awareness, or introspection. And obviously, there have been numerous studies, ours and others, talking about how noetic experiences, mediumship, psychic experiences, for the most part, imparts positive impact in people's lives and improves their quality of life. Factor 6 was about visualization and manifestation. And, there were so many different stories about people setting intentions and having that show up for them, or visualizing an outcome and showing that up for them, or using what they might call manifestation to create what they wanted in their lives. And so, that incorporates intention and attention and this visualization, and that some people resonated with that more than others. Another factor was healing. So many people had a greater affinity for administering healing through their noetic experiences. And we know from numerous studies now of energy medicine, studies done in humans and animals and plants and cells, that intention can create change in the physical, and that we see this pretty consistently. The effects are small, but they have been replicated in numerous different labs where that our intention, whether we're in the same place as the person or at a distance, can influence the physical world and through healing. And of course, there's numerous studies looking at energy medicine techniques such as therapeutic touch, Reiki, and those are probably two of the main ones. And there's growing evidence in different conditions such as pain, cancer, mental health symptoms, and hypertension, that these energy medicine techniques really work. So we saw many different cases of people doing healing, either individually or in a group as well. So it was great to be able to use those anecdotes to inform this noetic signature. So those are all the 11 factors. So the final noetic signature inventory has 46 items, so it's much more palatable than the original 350. It has these 11 factors, and it has 3 to 10 items each factor. Some of those are reverse scored, and that's the final inventory that we have now administered to about 670 people. So we just finished that data collection of this final noetic signature inventory. And the question now is, well, how does it actually perform? You know, we went through this process of the qualitative to the larger version, 175 version with the factor analysis, and does this reduced 46 item inventory actually perform well in terms of validity and reliability? So first we did something called a confirmatory factor analysis to make sure that our 11 factor solution for the original held true. So like I said, we did that in about 670 people, and we ran a confirmatory factor analysis for the 11 factor model. And when we look at the indices, it looks like a good fit. The bottom two, the root mean square error of approximation and the standardized root mean square residual, look really good. The comparative fit index and the Tucker-Lewis index are a little bit lower than we would like, but still in the good range, but not excellent range. So I think overall, looking at all these, we can say that it is generally a good fit. What I would like to do is another confirmatory factor analysis after we've collected a lot more data to see if it still holds. So while we administered the 46 item final version of the noetic signature inventory, we also administered many other questionnaires at the same time, so we could look at content validity. So we looked at convergent validity and how well it aligned with similar concepts. Like we have something called the Noetic Experience and Belief Scale, which is a validated 20-item scale looking at experience and belief. And also the Anomalous Experiences Inventory, which many of you might be familiar with. So we want to see how the NSI scores relate to these two, and hopefully there's a high correlation between them. And we also included a number of divergent questionnaires that we would hope do not align well with them, like a personality inventory. So the noetic signature isn't really about personality, so hopefully those won't match up. Emotional competence, highly sensitive person scale, the CAPE 15, which looks at psychotic symptoms, and the dissociative experiences scale taxon, which looks at dissociative symptoms. So there may be some correlation with those. In our previous studies, we've seen that there is some correlation with people who have paranormal experiences, but they don't reach pathological levels. So they don't go past cutoff scores for that. So we may see some correlation there, but hopefully not complete correlation. So we're working on this analysis right now. And then finally, we're going to do a retest reliability. So the people took it at, let's say, day one, the noetic signature inventory along with all of these other questionnaires, and then they did it again at 3 weeks later. And so what's interesting about this is we're hypothesizing that the Noetic Signature inventory score shouldn't change over such a short period. But who knows, perhaps over a year it would change, or if someone takes a remote viewing class or, some other course that supports them in nurturing their different capacities, that it may shift over time. So that'll be really interesting to explore as we go forward. So in terms of next steps and where this is all going, at IONS, we really value what we call the Noetic Handshake, which is, this partnership between science and direct experience. And so, here's the science, creating the inventory, validating this inventory, and then how do we support people to use that to create direct experiences of this in their life. And so what people receive is a report. So they get a detailed report that shows their score. It shows a description of all the factors. And then it also includes references from the literature describing each of those different factors. And I probably went a little too quickly without describing all the studies that align with each of those factors, and we can certainly talk about that in our discussion. So we are working on getting a website live so that anyone can take the Noetic Signature inventory and then get their results and their reports. Right now, people took it through kind of a research platform called SurveyMonkey, which some of you may know. So we want to make this available to the public in a really broad way so people have access to this. We're also working on curriculum to support people to explore this, a 2-hour workshop and then a 1 to 3 day workshop. And then you can imagine specialized programs by each factor. So, we know now there's so many different classes out there. Can we partner with people, say, who are teaching psychokinesis or remote viewing, and supporting people to nurture their unique Noetic signature if they choose to? So when they get the report, they'll see how they lay on a 0 to 100 scale on each of those factors. And some of them might be lower than higher. And so, one interesting question is this Noetic signature something that is set in stone? The whole nature nurture question. We've done some studies looking at the genetics of psychic ability. We've just finished a small pilot study that we just published where we did find one non-coding region of the DNA that was highly expressed in all of our psychics, but not in the controls. So we're raising some funding now so we can look into that more deeply. And anecdotally, I've seen it in my own life, like these experiences run in my family. There's some studies that have been done in Great Britain looking at pedigrees and finding familial lines where these experiences are more highly expressed. And an interesting pedigree pattern of autosomal dominant, which is really quite interesting. So I'm very curious to see if there is a genetic component that is maybe turned on and off in some way, and perhaps guides the specific aspects of the person's Noetic signature. So that's something we're still working on right now, and hopefully we will learn a lot more in the next coming years. So a final note here, I have a book coming out in September that goes into the Noetic signature and reviews a lot of the work around channeling, a broad definition of channeling that we're using at IONS. And this book is really meant to be for the general public and lay audience, to support them in understanding that these experiences are incredibly common and that it doesn't mean you're crazy if you're experiencing them, and how to support people to be able to talk about them and to use them in their daily life. So that's this is an IONS book that I authored that will hopefully push this intention forward as well. So I just want to offer deep gratitude to all the people that have made this research possible. And we have lots of time to be able to go into these pieces more deeply.
Okay,
Thank
Helané,
you.
we're finished there. Very
Thank
good.
you. Thank you.
It was really interesting, a lot of it. Both your handshake and the genetic component, a little news to me,
Mm-hmm.
but you really went through most of the phenomena we are used to and have learned the all different factors. They're really of interest to see categorized a little.
Yeah, it was fascinating to see how they laid out in, in ways that kind of matched our traditional terms, so there was a whole factor on telepathy and a factor on the intention setting, precognition. So, I was really hoping to stay away from too many jargony words because of the taboos, and yet they are useful. Like, you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So how can we, use them to a benefit and perhaps frame it in a way that can support people to feel more comfortable talking about it?
Yeah. Okay. I guess there are many of us who have questions to you. There is a possibility somewhere to raise hand, but I'm not sure we have talked very much about that. You can just wave your hand or just start talking, whoever have a question. All are curious, but no. Yes, Sarah.
Oh, here's a question in the chat. Someone says, will the Noetic Signature inventory over new webpage be possible to use by commercial active psychics to give them some kind of credibility so they can use high NSI score in their own ads? This is a great question. The NSI is a subjective questionnaire, so it really is self-report. It's not a vetting of people's skills. What you'll be interested to know about, Eric, is that we have another website called GotPsi. I'll put it in the chat here, gotpsi.org. And that's been a live website for over 20 years now. And we have billions of trials from people around the world. And it's essentially psi games, testing clairvoyance, precognition, psychokinesis, and people, it's an online task that you take and you get a score. So I think that website lends itself much better to be able to use as some sort of vetting. You couldn't say ION says I'm a great psychic, but you could say, hey, here's my score that I got on my GotPsi tasks. So check out that website. We are also revamping that. So probably in about a month and a half, that's getting a complete new overhaul, because after 20 years, it was due to get into a new format. I see someone else's raised hand here.
Jon?
Yes, I have a question about this Noetic signature and the training. Do you think you can train your abilities, improve the scores? I know that the experience from remote viewing says that you cannot train your talent further than you got it.
That is such a great question. I've actually talked to a bunch of teachers about this because, you know, this whole concept that everyone has the capacity to access information and energy from beyond time, I think really is true, but that the way that we do it is different, and that I'm hypothesizing, and I can't say whether this is true or not, is that we are born with some nature aspect that allows us to be better at some than others. And so take remote viewing, for instance. You have 3 people who are really excited to take a remote viewing class. Perhaps one of them has innate skill to do so, and the other 2 may not. So the one that has skill may learn how to do the remote viewing and do exceptionally well and be incredibly accurate and have an easy time of learning it. Whereas the other 2 could learn remote viewing, but they may not do as well or as easily. But the teachers that I spoke to said if someone is committed and believes they can, that they can learn it. And the teachers I spoke to were on trance channeling, psychokinesis, and remote viewing. So that's a little bit about that. And then I guess the piece about can it change over time? Can you nurture it? I mean, that's one of the goals we have with this project, is to be able to evaluate that and see, well, does it change? Do you get better? Do you not get better? Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you very much. But I have a comment to that. Other abilities like ability to play the violin, not everybody can become on the world level top violinist. So it might be distributed in similar ways as other abilities.
Yes, exactly.
How far can you get?
That's a great example, right? So anyone could learn how to play the violin, but they may not play it well, right? And it may be very difficult with them. Or you look at basketball, you know, basketball player, you know, you have the NBA professionals who are exceptional. I can go there and try to shoot a basket and I might get 1 out of 100. I can play it, but I'm not going to play it well.
Right.
Thank you.
Now we have, I think, Ekaterina, and then Linda.
Yes, I have a little commentary to the previous question, if I can say something, because
Yes.
I went to the course to learn about these abilities, and it took some time, but I should say that it is possible, but we are all very much closed and we are afraid. And the whole course was about to open and to take it, not be afraid of taking the information. And we were learning about what is possible to take. So it's practice, but I am sure that it's possible for everyone, because it's about to go into the theta brain waves. Everybody can go to the waves before we fall asleep. We are in the theta waves. And while we are on this level, everyone can learn. So the most difficult thing is to stay in this level and not fall asleep and not begin thinking. Because when we are thinking, we are in the beta, but when we are sleeping, we are in delta. So the most difficult thing is to stay there and to get the information. But I'm sure that everybody can. And I'm also playing violin, actually. So practice, practice, and practice. Of course, some have better abilities and others, but everyone can. So
Thank you.
just try, just try.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. That's so true. I agree with you. You know, there's one remote viewing teacher that I know that uses theta binaural beats music to actually support her students to be in the right state to do remote viewing. So that's another interesting, that's Julia Mossbridge, who's published a lot on precognition and such. So that's an interesting piece that you mentioned about the theta. Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, I'm from
Linda,
Canada.
yes.
Hi.
Yes.
Hi, Linda.
I'm from Canada. So what I know is that myself and my two daughters both have a lot of abilities, but my observation is that when we've had traumatic events in our life and postpartum, that increased our abilities. So do you have anything to say about that?
That's a great comment. I see now that you put that in the chat too. You know, I have seen that too. And there's often the anecdote of, having a traumatic event that then blasts open people's psychic abilities. I'm sure many of you have heard of that. There have been some studies that I can think of knowing about mediumship and surveying mediums and asking them about their trauma history, and that there's increased trauma history in mediums, not in every study, but in a number of different studies. So, this is just complete speculation, right? Perhaps there's something about the traumatic experience that allows us to open up to that type of information. You can also think about it in terms of evolution, that if we are in fight or flight and are, needing to survive in some way, so some trauma's coming, that having psychic awareness and that increased information coming into us would support us in being able to survive. So there's a number of authors that talk about psychic abilities as an evolutionary process for that very reason, that it actually allowed us to survive more easily because we were able to get information in an expanded way beyond just our traditional five senses. So that's a little bit of research, a little bit of speculation, but I hope that's helpful.
But I also noticed when my grandchildren were very little that they had no idea that this could be out of the normal experience. So they just would answer questions and we would talk about these things up to the age of about 5 or 6. And their abilities were extraordinary. They could read each other's minds, the two little boys, and they could say things that were incredible. Now that's gone.
Yeah, that's quite fascinating, and I think pretty well documented that children are much more aware of those, of the noetics, paranormal, parapsychology, have greater psychic abilities. And why does it shift? I think part of it is social norms and depending on their families and whether they're supportive or not. And kind of going back to the previous question asker, children are in theta often, like their dominant brain wave frequency is closer to theta than we are as we grow older. So perhaps that has something to do with it on a physiological level. But I know that the taboos are incredibly strong, so at least in the West, maybe in some countries like Brazil or others where it's just part of the culture, it's not so taboo. But in, the US, most families would discourage that type of communication, and then they want to please their parents, so it just gets shut down.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
I recognize that idea of it's a component in our evolution, for our evolution. I recognize the idea from Stanford about time-mediated instrumental response, that you can use ESP to scan your environment and then influence the environment in a way that is good for you. All of it unconscious. That's quite interesting aspects.
Yes, absolutely. And, Jim Carpenter's first sight theory and model is similar. You know, it's like you're unconsciously manifesting your reality to support you. So it's fascinating.
Yeah,
Thank you.
really. I also recognized in one of the factors you mentioned, that you can sense in your body what happens to another person. That was something I recognized from my twin telepathy research. That
Okay.
twins can sense in the body what happens to their twin.
Yes.
It's
That's
not
fascinating.
mental, but it's biological or physiological.
Right. Yeah, I was quite interested in how many different factors were related to the body. And there were nuances to the 3 different ones. So the one was, I just feel it. So that's like a general intuitive sense that people feel in their body. And then the second one was like goosebumps and just, okay, every time I get goosebumps, I know I'm getting information. And then the third one was the one that you talked about. So if we think about our body as this instrument that we're walking around in, and the various ways that it can actually access this information and energy that's around us that, you know, we wouldn't necessarily perceive with our traditional 5 senses. It's quite miraculous, in my opinion, and pretty incredible. So we, you know, at IONS, we're also, you know, very interested in energy medicine and doing studies on energy medicine in the biofield. And one of the things that we're trying to figure out how to do is how to objectively measure that, you know, like getting equipment and, you know, different sensors to be able to do it. And it's, we laugh sometimes because we think, well, how can we get the body outside of ourselves in a tool, because the body's such an incredibly sensitive receiver or, you know, sensor of this information.
Yeah, I guess you know of John Cruth's research and
Yeah.
David Muasam.
Yes. We work with Chi on that. So, and David
Yeah.
Newsom's part of the Consciousness and Healing Initiative. So yeah, we're partnering with them on that. And so it's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, very good. Okay, Hans Ljungqvist, you have raised your hand.
And then there's, go ahead.
Can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
I have some problems with my computer. I can't get my picture on the screen, but I will ask the question anyways.
Yes.
Helané, in your research, have you looked into the left and right hemispheres operations in those people?
No, we have not done EEG in association with the Noetic Signature. What's wonderful is on our team, we have Arnaud Delorme, who is a neuroscientist who created EEG Lab, which is, you know, the world's most used open source EEG software system. And so we also have a PhD candidate there who did look at right and left in association with well-being. And he has plans to look at it with our different tasks, the online tasks I told you about, but we haven't looked at yet in relation to the Noetic Signature. I am very interested to see what that would show, just in terms of, you know, the linear thought associated with the left side and more, you know, intuitive abstract thought associated with the right. There's also some work done in neurofeedback talking about coherence between the 2 hemispheres, and that perhaps when the 2 hemispheres are working together in a coherent way, that it allows us to enter into transcendent states more easily. Yeah. So that's a little bit about what I know on those pieces. Do you have anything you want to add to that, Hans? Do you know of anything, or is it just curiosity?
No, I'm interested in the functions of the brain. And as we all maybe know, is that the little child is functioning through the right hemisphere. It's directly experiencing the world. And at a certain stage, as I understand, the scientists are very uncertain at what stage, but relatively early, the left hemisphere starts to make comments on the experience, and those comments are from the upbringing. So I was just thinking, like, have you heard about Ian McGilchrist?
I haven't.
And I will recommend the book to you because I think you will find it. The book's name is The Master and His Emissary, and
Okay.
he's the one in the world right now who is the most proficient researcher into the brain. And he talks about how these two different mode of experience or how we are building the world. And I got very interesting in this, that could it be, it's a possible thought. Could it be, and I think you are right, because only functioning from the right hemisphere, only from the right, then we couldn't verbalize the experience. So I think there should be a coherence, but it should be very interesting to see how these people who have this experience maybe has a stronger affiliation through the right hemisphere.
Yes. Yeah, there was that I think she was a neuroscientist who had a stroke. Yeah. And I'm not remembering her name, but she wrote a very popular book.
Yeah, I read the book, and I also I don't remember her name now, but I read the book, and what she was experiencing was a kind of instant enlightenment.
Yes, that was amazing.
Yeah, because
it makes us. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the left hemisphere had a stroke, and she experienced the world in this manner. But one thing that is very important to say is that we should have both the left and right hemisphere functioning, because otherwise we wouldn't build computers or have a society.
Exactly. And my spiritual teacher has talked about this a lot, like in times past, to become enlightened, you'd have to go into a cave and, the Himalayas and isolate yourself. And that it's almost like we're being called now to be able to hold both at the same time. How do we wake up and become enlightened and be able to be in the world simultaneously? And I think that is the function of the right and the left hemisphere being in a balanced state. So yeah, so it's always, for us at IONS, we have so many research interests, and it's about trying to manage our time and resources, and we can only do so much. So, but yes, I am very interested in that line of research. I also there was a question on the chat that someone was directing me to, Karen's question, which is, what studies could you suggest on the existence of ion signature in individuals? So what I'll do is I can email Goran the papers that we've written about this, so you can pass it out to your group so that you can learn more information. Also on our website, we have all of our publications up there. And this research program's pretty new, so we're just beginning this process specifically on the Noetic signature. So I hope that's helpful, Karen.
Okay, so if anybody has any interest in the report from Helané, please email me so I don't have to email all of you. But I will assist in distributing it. Renee had a question. If you unmute, yes, okay.
Yes. I was thinking, because you mentioned that you're trying to measure the field or something about field related to this Noetic signature. But it seems that the methods that you've mentioned are like direct measurement. So have you considered like indirect measurement? Like, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the methods that Dr. Rupert Sheldrake used to like show some evidence of the morphic resonance. So I think all of these methods like indirect measurement, right? So have you considered those?
Yeah, so Rupert Sheldrake is actually an IONS fellow, so it's great to have him as one of our fellows. And we are trying a number of different things, and again, it's all about time and energy. So right now, what's looking the most promising is something called a quantum noise generator, which is similar to a random number generator, but it's not spitting out zeros and ones. It's actually random noise that we're observing. So we're creating kind of a wall of these devices to be able to see what they detect, because we've done numerous studies where they showed differences during healing, during channeling, during these unique states that they might be sensitive to the biofield. And then there's a new device that our team is just building now called a Theremin, and it's a small, I actually am not a physicist, so I can't describe it very well, but there's going to be a bunch of them, and then it's like the capacitance in the air, it shifts from shifts in the air. So those are the two we're working on now, and I'm sure there's many, many, many more that could be used. Thank you.
Okay. More questions from somebody? No, silent moment.
I'm curious if, as I went through the factors, if any of you resonated with some more than others. Did you personally find that, oh yeah, I experienced that, and oh no, I don't experience that? I'd be curious if you found that useful in any way to be able to see them laid out like that.
Yes, that could be of interest. I belong to one of the few that I don't have any attention to real psychic experiences myself, even if I should have being this alert in the field. Most have experiences that makes them interested, but I can't say I have had so many, but I hear other people really have many experiences. Perhaps mentally, emotionally, they sense
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
I think physical phenomena not that regularly, but feeling something, sensing something is rather more often occurring.
Thank you. People are putting stuff into the chat, which is great. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Oh, yes.
Yes, the factors. I have a whole chapter on the factors in the book, and then we're probably going to write a separate book just about the Noetic Signature, but the Science of Channeling book does have a whole section on the Noetic Signature too. And that, I think I said, it comes out in September, and it's available now for pre-order on Amazon.
Okay. Very good.
Yeah, so you'll see people responding, everyone's writing in something different, which is fascinating, So I'm really excited about this work. And the genetic piece, I'm also really excited about too. So maybe we'll reach out to your community about, if we're looking for, like, one that's unique is physical mediumship, right? Physical mediumship is incredibly unique, and it's not studied as much in current times as it was historically in psychical society. So this whole generation of ectoplasm, I imagine, could have some genetic component. So I talked to Leslie Keene too, who wrote Surviving Death and has worked with Stuart Alexander, who is a physical medium. It would be fascinating to be able to get DNA samples from a bunch of physical mediums around the world to see if there's some genetic component there.
Absolutely. Intuitively, I feel it should be.
Yeah. Do you have any strong physical mediums in Sweden?
Well, we have some persons who claim to be physical mediumship. There is no science on it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not been for many years, but there are some, or perhaps several, claiming to be.
Mm-hmm.
And they have their own experiences and discussions, but there is no real scientific validation of it, but they come to their own conclusion.
Right.
And I respect that, but there is no scientific evaluation, but
Mm-hmm.
they're primarily interested in their own experiences and evaluating them themselves.
Right.
That's what step one for many people. They are not interested perhaps in scientific.
Right.
It's quite difficult with all these controls. I have understood from the reports I have come across when it comes to mediumship to control all factors in the lab.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's the major thing is to, there are so many different controls people use, like, strapping them down to the chair and the, glow in the dark bands and, making sure the space is totally controlled. And
Yeah,
are they open to having visitors to their circle?
I don't know.
No,
Mm.
no,
I don't know. No,
no, they aren't.
Yeah.
no. Mm.
Yeah.
I've heard some reports on conferences about difficult aspects at mediumship research.
Right.
For example, buying things that could work as ectoplasma makes
Right.
it really difficult to evaluate. Even if you're pure,
Yes.
you shouldn't buy things that could work as ectoplasma.
Yeah. That's
Or
true.
hiding things in your eyes.
Yeah.
That makes it bizarre and difficult to evaluate.
Right.
So to have a real clean case, it's difficult, but it can be the case that physical mediumship works, but there are so many rumors and indications of things that makes it strange. So it's very difficult to evaluate.
Yes, that's true. I think especially because it has to happen in the dark, if there was a physical medium that could do their work in the light, I think it would make it much easier. There was one historical physical medium, David Home, that could do it in the light. But besides that, I don't know of any others. I think, what I've read most recently was the most convincing for me was the Scope group did a fascinating experiment where they had virgin unopened video film or photography film in a locked box that then ended up having writing on it. And that was a very, very controlled experiment with multiple, skeptical researcher observers. And I found that experiment really fascinating. I'm just looking at the chats here.
Yes.
Jan writes, physical mediumship, reference important writings, books by Stephen Browd. There are physical circles operating in many countries, but will they participate in scientific research? Yes, I have my pile of survival books here that I've been going through, including his. And it says, Dear Dr. Wahbeh, did you long time ago write a book on research about previous lives? Huge set of participants led in meditations and then followed up with question forms. Wasn't me, but it sounds like a really nice study. And then Nina writes, I have found breathing patterns or training as a factor influencing abilities. I've experienced some enhanced perception, martial arts, sensitivity. Yes, that's true. The breath is fascinating. I don't know what time we have to close, But I
Well, we
can
can-
share about one more study. So we looked at transcendent states during meditation across multiple different traditions. And the most consistent finding was the breath, which was fascinating. So the breath was the most consistent finding of when people were in that transcendent samadhi oneness state. In fact, respiratory suspension, or the stopping of breath, was the strongest predictor that people were in that oneness state. So I think the training of breath is important in some way. And then mirror neurons. Yes, I know there's a ton of work on that in, traditional venues, and I don't know a lot about that being related to psychic experiences.
No, there are some. I think mirror is less neuroscience. Yes, not quantum physics.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Now and then there are this life after life.
Yeah, that wasn't me. Similar name though. That's funny.
Yeah, yes, it's similar name.
Yeah, I've heard of that work actually. It's quite fascinating. I think that was with hypnosis. Looking at, people who did past life or future life regressions and testing those out. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Was there a new question in the chat?
Is there a hard and fast rule for differentiating psychopathy from, okay, this is such a great question. I've written a lot about this, and because, I think, when I do talks out in the world, when I used to be able to do that out in the world, I'd have a line of people coming up to me and they'd say, I haven't told anybody about this, but I had this experience, but I'm really scared to tell them. And almost always they'll say, because they're going to think I'm crazy. So there's this deep fear of being, pegged with having a mental pathology if you have these experiences. So the reality is most psychic experiences are not pathological. And obviously there's so many nuances around that. People who have psychic experiences do score higher on psychotic and dissociative scales, but their scores do not pass a cutoff point of what you would consider pathological. So this person is asking, is there a hard and fast rule? I would say no. However, I think the most indicative piece to differentiate between the two is a person's functionality. So how are you coping in your daily life? Are you getting impressions and information that overwhelms you such that you can't function, that you have a negative mood, that it's negatively impacting you? If so, then yes, it's worth it to seek out mental health support to see what's going on with you. Most studies show that people are highly functional with the psychic experiences also. And that the psychic experiences impart a positive impact. So if you aren't having a positive impact and you aren't able to function anymore, then yes, please seek help. And our surveys showed that in terms of dissociative symptoms, when the people were having psychic experiences that were very strong and very frequent, that's when their dissociative symptoms went past the cutoff score into pathology. But that group really is a minority, and yet it's important for us to be aware of that. The last point I'll make on this is I think there are very compassionate mental health providers who are interested in this work and have a larger context that psi phenomenon are a real phenomenon, and being able to hold both to support people. And it's important to see if you can seek out one of those mental health professionals. Similarly, if you seek out help from spiritual advisors, they may diminish the mental health aspects and say, oh, you're just becoming enlightened, where you may actually need mental health support. So it's kind of, holding both. There are some really great groups out there that we have on our frequently asked questions page on our website. There's the Spiritual Emergence Network. There's the Yale COPE Project. There's another group that I just learned about. I think it's called Dancing with the Trickster, where people can actually post a video of their experience and then also seek help if they need it from their directory. So it's a very, very important topic, and I think a huge one that needs to be addressed so we can bust these taboos and have this really come into the common domain, common conversations.
I agree. I can only agree. Okay, I see not so many raised hands right now. Otherwise, take your chance. Otherwise, it's almost time to end this interesting evening, or for us at least. You continue your day. But if there is no more raised hand, I can just say many thanks to you, Helané, for your evening or your morning.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. It's wonderful to see you all halfway across the world, and I'm deeply appreciative that we have these ways to be able to connect and stay connected around the world. It's just an incredible, wonderful technology. So
Yeah.
please stay connected. Join the Institute of Noetic Sciences email list. There's no charge or anything for that. You just get on our email list and learn about the different work we're doing and be able to see how this project unfolds. We have a publication page where we have all of our publications available to you, all of our research projects, and we got a lot of fun stuff going on. So I invite you to please stay connected.
Just like to add, I think I completely agree. IAN is one of the most important institutions we have in this area.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thanks,
Bye-bye to all of
everybody.
you.
Thank